In this video, I'm going to reveal 9 of my favorite wines that currently sell for around $60 a bottle. There's red wines and white wines in a variety of different countries and regions represented, so there should be something for everyone. Branaire-Ducru is a historic estate that traces its roots back to 1680 when it was part of the Bechevel estate. At the time, Bechevel was an extremely large estate, but the owner had lots of debts, and so that large estate was broken up into several smaller estates, including both Bechevel and Branaire-Ducru. Like Bechevel, Branaire-Ducru is a fourth growth in the 1855 classification of Bordeaux, and it's located in Saint-Julien. They have 60 hectares of vines that are planted to 68% Cabernet Sauvignon, 28% Merlot, and they also have small amounts of Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc. These vines average around 35 years of age. The current owners acquired Branaire-Ducru back in the 1988 time period, and they subsequently embarked on an ambitious campaign to overhaul both the winery and the vineyards. These efforts paid off handsomely, and by 2000, Branaire-Ducru was producing some of the best wines that they had ever produced, and they've been on a tear ever since. This is undoubtedly one of the very best values in Bordeaux. I particularly enjoy Branaire-Ducru because it's a wine that, for a classified growth, has some elegance and finesse, and is one that you can actually enjoy when it's fairly young. The 2020 Branaire-Ducru is the wine that's on store shelves now. This wine did extremely well with critics, and it was an outstanding effort from Branaire-Ducru, so it's definitely an excellent choice for around $60 a bottle. Located in Piedmont, Italy, Massolino is a historic producer that dates back to 1896. The winery is located high atop Serralunga d'Alba and features stunning views of the vineyards below, even when it's foggy, like on the day that I visited. This is a traditional producer that matures its Nebbiolo in large Slavonian oak casks. The winery was substantially renovated in 2016, and so now it features state-of-the-art winemaking equipment. While Massolino has a number of top single vineyard wines, the next top wine for $60 per bottle is the 2019 Massolino Barolo, which is their classic blend that contains Nebbiolo from a number of different villages. 2019 was a very strong classic vintage for Barolo, and this is definitely an outstanding effort from Massolino and one that was well received by critics. Vieux Donjon is one of the top producers in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. While this winery dates back to 1979, the vineyard holdings are actually much older than that, and some of them are as old as 80 years or so. This is so because the winery was created out of a marriage. The owners were married in 1979, and at that time, each of their parents had separate vineyard holdings. Following the marriage, those holdings were combined to create Vieux Donjon. While it may not rival the heights of the epic 2019 vintage of Vieux Donjon, which I definitely recommend that you add to your collection, the 2020 vintage was outstanding in its own right, and it received favorable scores from a number of critics. The 2020 vintage is a blend that consists of 75% Grenache, 10% each of Syrah and Mourvedre, and there's a little bit of Cinsault as well. Unfortunately, the price of Sassicaia has skyrocketed in recent years and now sells for around $300 per bottle. But fortunately, Tenuta San Guido also has an impressive second wine called Guidalberto that sells for closer to $60 per bottle. Better still, the 2021 vintage is on store shelves now, and that may arguably be the best vintage of Guidalberto to date. This is so according to the director of winemaking for Tenuta San Guido. In fact, the 2021 vintage was so strong that they actually use less Merlot in that vintage than they do for most years. As such, this wine is 60% Cabernet Sauvignon and 40% Merlot. This is definitely a wine that will continue to gain complexity and to improve with some additional bottle age, but in a pinch, you can definitely enjoy it when it's young if you give it a healthy decant and preferably with a meal. The next top wine for $60 a bottle is one that I discovered during a trip to Spain. During one of my first meals that trip, a sommelier recommended this wine, and it's been one of my favorites ever since. I'm talking about the Rafael Palacios as sorts Godello. This is a wine that comes from the Valdeorras portion of Spain, which is in Galicia. This is an extremely impressive wine and my absolute favorite pairing for seafood paella. This is a wine that matures for 7 months in 500-liter oak barrels. The vines date back to the 1970s and the early 1980s, which is certainly extremely old for Godello. This wine checks in at around 14.5% alcohol by volume. It's definitely a very elegant, refined wine. Some people even compare it to a Polini Montrachet. 2021 was definitely a cooler vintage as well, so this is probably one of the most elegant expressions of as sorts ever produced. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. Rudi Pichler is one of the top producers in Austria's Wachau region, and the next top wine for $60 a bottle is a Riesling Smaragd from the outstanding 2022 vintage. This is a wine that received an impressive 98-point score from James Suckling, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all if this wine makes his top 100 wines for 2024 later this year. One of the things I like best about Wachau Riesling is that almost all of them are dry. It would be extremely unusual for a Wachau producer to have residual sugar in their wines. This is definitely a prime example of that. This wine comes in at 13% alcohol by volume. It's a mineral-driven wine and one that has descriptors that include stone fruit, and there's definitely ample acidity as well, as you might suspect for a Riesling. The next top wine for $60 a bottle comes from top Bordeaux producer Léoville-Lascasse, namely the 2020 Clos du Marquis. This is not a second wine because it does not come from declassified fruit that does not make it into the top wine. Rather, it's a second label. This is so because the fruit for this wine always comes from the same small walled vineyard that's located in a prestigious area very close to Léoville-Barton and Léoville-Poiferret. The 2020 vintage for this wine was definitely well received by critics and received a number of top scores. This wine is a blend that consists of 61% Cabernet Sauvignon, 33% Merlot, and there's some Cab Franc in there as well. It matures in 40% New French oak. This is definitely a wine that will require some patience though, as it's quite structured and has some high acidity. It'll definitely be much better in about 6 or 7 years or so. But it'll be well worth your wait, as this is an outstanding vintage for Clos du Marquis. The next top wine for $60 a bottle comes from one of the benchmark producers in Loire, Domaine Huet. Domaine Huet began biodynamic farming practices long before that was in vogue and was one of the earliest adopters of biodynamics. The 2022 Domaine Huet Le Mont Moelleux is a wine that comes from Vouvray, and it's 100% Chenin Blanc. This is a wine that you can definitely expect to have some medium levels of sweetness, so if you're only looking for a dry wine, this is definitely not the wine for you. When this wine is in its youth, it's particularly reticent and it's not very aromatic, but with time, it becomes extremely aromatic and has pronounced aromatic intensity. So it's definitely one that I would put away in the back of your cellar for about 10 years or so. When our wine club gets together and we try to blind taste each other on wines, there's usually some sort of a trick involved. One of our favorite tricks is to slide in a bottle of Kumeu River, and inevitably someone will guess that it's a white Burgundy. The 2022 Kumeu River Coddington Chardonnay, for example, is one that compares very favorably to a number of Premier Crus from Burgundy. The 2022 vintage was excellent in Auckland, New Zealand, and Kumeu River is a top producer that makes Chardonnay in a Burgundian style. Typically, I'm able to distinguish this wine at a blind tasting from Burgundy based on the fact that it has a slightly riper fruit profile with descriptors that would include nectarine and melon. This is a wine you can enjoy immediately, but it will cruise in your cellar for up to a decade or so. You really can't go wrong with any of the wines in this producer's lineup, however, as they do an excellent job at all price points, and they do have a number of other single vineyard wines that I enjoy very much as well. This wine comes in at 13.5% alcohol by volume. I've prepared dozens of these top wine videos at price points ranging from $15 per bottle all the way up to $100 per bottle and everything in between. So if you'd like more of my top wine recommendations, be sure to check out the playlist that's linked above.